There is a specific sound that a heart makes when it breaks. For me, it didn't sound like a dramatic thud or a shattering plate. It sounded exactly like heavy 300-gram cold-press watercolor paper being crunched into a tight ball. I stood there in the doorway of the sunroom, gripping the handle of my ceramic coffee mug so hard my knuckles turned white, watching my 17-year-old grandson Tyler laugh as he tossed my work into the black heavy-duty garbage bag. He didn't just drop it in. He practically dunked it like he was playing basketball, cheering for himself as my hard work landed among the coffee grounds and banana peels. That painting wasn't just a doodle. It was a landscape of the foggy coastline in Oregon I had visited 30 years ago with my late husband. It had taken me 3 weeks to get the layering of the gray sky just right, trying to capture that specific way the light hits the mist before it burns off in the morning. I remembered every brushstroke. I remembered how my arthritis had flared up on the second day, but I pushed through because the image in my head was so vivid I just had to get it out. And now Tyler was calling it preschool trash, while his sister Chloe giggled and filmed him for whatever social media story she was posting that day. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march over there, snatch the bag from his hands and demand respect. But I didn't. I stayed frozen in the shadow of the doorframe, invisible to them. Being old has a way of making you invisible, especially in a house full of people who only see you as a walking checkbook or a burden. They didn't see Evelyn the artist. They saw Evelyn the Grandma who took up too much space in the guest room and had too many dust collectors stacked in the corner. Before I tell you exactly how much money they were casually throwing into a landfill, I want to take a quick second to see who is hanging out with me today. I love reading through the comments and seeing how global this community is. So, do me a huge favor and drop a comment down below telling me where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Are you grabbing a midnight snack in London, or are you having your morning coffee in New York? Let me know in the comments and let's see which time zone is winning today. Alright, back to the sunroom. Chloe picked up another piece, a study of wildflowers I had done last spring. She held it up with 2 fingers like it was contaminated with radioactive waste. She made a face, crinkling her nose in that exaggerated way teenagers do when they want to be mean without saying a word. She turned the paper over, saw the price tag I had jokingly penciled on the back years ago, $50, and scoffed loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She looked at Tyler and said that nobody in their right mind would pay 50 cents for this, let alone $50. She said it looked like something a toddler did with finger paints. That hurt. It stung worse than the arthritis in my knees. I have been painting for 40 years. I started when my children were small, stealing moments late at night at the kitchen table when the house was finally quiet. It was my escape. It was the only thing that was just mine. Over the decades I had filled dozens of portfolios. Some were good, some were just practice, but all of them were pieces of my soul. And my own flesh and blood were treating them like garbage. Tyler grabbed the wildflower painting from her and ripped it in half. Just like that. The sound of the paper tearing was sharp and violent in the quiet afternoon. He tossed the pieces into the bag and said they were doing me a favor. He said they were decluttering the house so there would be more room for his gaming setup when I eventually kicked the bucket. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the casualness of it. They were discussing my death and the disposal of my life's work as if they were deciding what to order for pizza. My daughter-in-law Linda walked into the room then. For a brief, foolish second I thought she would stop them. I thought she would scold them for destroying my property. But Linda just sighed, looked at the black bag and told them to make sure they tied it tight so it wouldn't leak. She looked right at the stack of my portfolios and told them to hurry up because she wanted the corner cleared out by dinner. She called my art eyesores that gathered dust and made the house look like a hoarding situation. I stepped back into the hallway before they could spot me. I needed to catch my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a mix of rage and profound sorrow. But as I leaned against the wall, my hand brushed against the pocket of my oversized cardigan. I felt the sharp, crisp edge of a thick envelope tucked safely inside. It was a letter I had received just yesterday. It wasn't a bill and it wasn't a flyer. It was a formal appraisal and an offer from a man named Arthur Vance, one of the most respected art dealers in the city. I had sent him photos of my work on a whim a month ago, fully expecting to be ignored. Instead, he had replied within 24 hours. And the number written in that letter? It had so many zeros it made me dizzy. I listened to Tyler tie up the garbage bag, the plastic rustling as he hauled it toward the back door. He was complaining about how heavy it was. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, forcing my heartbeat to slow down. Let them laugh. Let them throw away the trash. They had no idea that the portfolio Tyler had just missed, the leather-bound one sitting under the chair, was worth more than Linda's car. They thought they were clearing out junk, but they were actually severing their own inheritance. I touched the letter in my pocket again, letting the paper ground me. The game had changed and they didn't even know the rules yet. To understand why I didn't immediately explode when I saw Tyler dunking my hard work into the garbage, you have to understand the last 3 years of my life. It hasn't been a sudden shift. It was a slow, agonizing erosion of my dignity. I moved in with my son Mark and his family shortly after my husband, Robert, passed away from a sudden heart attack. At the time, Mark had tears in his eyes. He sat at my kitchen table holding my hand and told me that family sticks together. He said they wanted me there, that I shouldn't be alone in that big empty house full of memories. Sounded so sweet, so genuine. But looking back, I think they just saw a free live-in nanny and a steady stream of pension checks to help cover their mortgage. I became the invisible grandma very quickly. It started with small things. They would order takeout and forget to ask me what I wanted, so I'd end up eating a cheese sandwich over the sink while they feasted on sushi in the living room. Then it escalated to them talking about me while I was sitting right there, usually about my health or my finances, discussing me like a problem to be solved rather than a human being. But nothing drew their ire quite like my painting. To them it wasn't a passion, it was a nuisance. It was a mess that I needed to contain. I remember one Sunday roast about 6 months ago that really set the tone for everything that is happening now. Sundays were supposed to be our family time, a rule I tried to enforce to keep some semblance of connection. I had spent 4 hours cooking a pot roast exactly the way Mark used to love it when he was a boy, slow-cooked with carrots, onions, and a heavy splash of red wine. The house smelled divine, rich and savory, the kind of smell that should make a house feel like a home. We were all sitting around the dining table. The only sounds were the scraping of forks and the notifications popping up on Chloe's phone, which she refused to put away. I tried to break the ice. I had been working on a watercolor portrait of an old fisherman I'd met at the pier, and I was incredibly proud of how I'd captured the weathering in his skin. I cleared my throat and smiled at Mark. I told him that I'd finally cracked the technique for painting realistic skin tones and that I was thinking of entering a local contest at the library. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark didn't even look up from his plate. He just kept chewing, looking tired and checked out. It was Linda who responded. She put her fork down with a sharp clatter and let out a long, exaggerated sigh. She looked at me with this pitying, condescending smile that made my stomach churn. She told me that at my age I should be focusing on things that actually matter, like helping more around the house or organizing my medical paperwork, instead of making messes with children's paint. She called it a useless hobby that was ruining the carpet in the guest room. Then Tyler chimed in, his mouth half full of the food I had cooked. He laughed and asked if I was going to become a famous artist on Instagram, or if I was just going to waste more of his inheritance on expensive paper. That comment hung in the air. His inheritance. They didn't see my money as mine. They saw it as theirs, just waiting to be transferred once I was out of the way. They viewed every tube of cobalt blue or burnt sienna I bought as a theft from their future bank accounts. I didn't say a word that night. I just stood up, took my plate to the kitchen and scraped my roast into the bin. But I didn't stop painting. In fact, their cruelty became my fuel. Every time Linda made a snide comment about the smell of my paints, I worked harder on my floral studies. Every time Mark ignored me to watch football, I retreated to my room and perfected my landscapes. I started waking up at 4 a.m. just to paint in the silence of the dawn, capturing the morning light before the toxicity of the household woke up. I wasn't just dabbling, I was studying. I watched masterclasses online with headphones on so they wouldn't hear. I read books on color theory and composition until my eyes blurred. While they were watching reality TV and rotting their brains, I was learning how to make water look wet on a dry page. I was learning how to convey emotion through the tilt of a tree branch. I was building a portfolio that was professional, polished, and powerful. They thought I was just an old lady dabbing paint on paper to pass the time until I died. They had no idea that I was documenting my grief, my loneliness, and my resilience in every single piece. The useless hobby was saving my life, keeping my mind sharp and my soul alive in a house that was trying to crush both. And just like that wildflower painting Tyler had ripped up earlier, They were blindly destroying the very thing that could have saved them too. They saw trash. I saw triumph. And as I stood there recalling that Sunday dinner, feeling the weight of the appraisal letter in my pocket, I realized that the useless artist was about to have the last laugh. But first I had to survive the heartbreak of what Tyler was about to do next. An act so malicious it would force my hand completely. If the trash bag incident was the cracks forming in the dam, what happened 3 days later was the dynamite that blew the whole thing wide open. I was in the sunroom again, the only place in the house where the light was decent enough for my eyes. I was working on a large canvas this time, stepping out of my comfort zone of watercolor paper. It was a mixed media piece, incorporating layers of texture to represent the complexity of aging, the rough patches, the smooth memories, the faded colors of youth. I was using an old wooden easel that my husband, Robert, had bought me for our 40th anniversary. It wasn't fancy, just sturdy beechwood with brass fittings, but it was one of the few physical things I had left that he had actually touched and assembled for me. Tyler barged in around 4 p.m. He didn't knock, they never knocked. He had his hand out before he even opened his mouth. He needed $200 for a VIP pass to some music festival over the weekend. He spoke fast, assuming the answer was yes because in his mind my pension was just his allowance waiting to be distributed. When I told him no, calmly without looking up from my canvas, the air in the room changed instantly. It went from heavy to volatile. He asked me why I was being so stingy. He threw that word at me like a stone. Stingy. He brought up the free rent I was getting, conveniently forgetting that my contribution to the household bills was higher than what a tenant would pay for a room twice the size. When I refused a second time telling him that my money was for my needs, he lost it. He didn't just yell, he got physical with the space. He kicked the leg of my easel. It happened in slow motion. The beechwood, dried out from years of use, didn't just tip over. It snapped. The leg gave way with a sickening crunch that sounded like a bone breaking. My canvas hit the floor face down, smearing the wet acrylics into the rug, but I didn't care about the painting. I stared at the splintered wood of the easel, Robert's gift, lying broken on the floor. Tyler looked at it, surprised for a split second, and then he shrugged. Actually shrugged. He said maybe if I bought less art crap, I could afford to help my family out, and then he stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I didn't cry. I didn't chase after him. I simply bent down, picked up the pieces of the easel and set them gently in the corner. That was the moment. The tether that held me to this family, the obligation I felt to Mark and his children, snapped right along with that wood. I went to my room, changed into my best Sunday suit, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons, and called a taxi. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I didn't leave a note. The ride to the city took 45 minutes. I sat in the back, clutching my large leather portfolio, the one Tyler had missed, watching the suburbs fade into the steel and glass of the downtown district. I felt like a spy carrying state secrets. When the taxi pulled up in front of the address Arthur Vance had given me, I felt a wave of intimidation. It was a gallery in the high-end arts district, the kind of place with minimal signage and a security guard at the door who looked like he doubled as a runway model. I walked inside, and the atmosphere was the polar opposite of my son's house. It was quiet, smelling of expensive floor polish and espresso. The lighting was soft and intentional. A receptionist looked up, and before I could even apologize for being just a grandmother in a sensible suit, Arthur Vance himself came walking out of a back office. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I expected him to be dismissive. I expected the same useless hobby energy I got at home. Instead, he walked right up to me with his hand extended and a genuine smile. "Evelyn," he said as if we were old friends. "I have been waiting for this moment since I opened your envelope." He led me to his private office, offered me sparkling water, and treated me with a reverence I hadn't felt in years. We laid the portfolio out on his massive oak desk. As he turned the pages, flipping past the landscapes, the portraits, the abstract studies of grief, he didn't check his phone. He didn't sigh. He made noises of appreciation. He pulled out a magnifying glass to look at the brushwork on a painting of a rainy city street. "The luminosity here," he murmured, pointing to a reflection in a puddle. "It's remarkable. You have a voice, Evelyn. A very distinct, very marketable voice. The art world is starving for this kind of authentic, raw, emotive work." He pulled out a contract. It wasn't just for one painting. He wanted to represent me exclusively for a limited series. He told me he had a buyer lined up already, a private collector from Europe who had seen the scans I sent and was obsessed. The advance alone was staggering. It was enough to buy a small house. It was enough to travel the world. It was enough to never have to listen to Linda complain about the price of groceries ever again. I sat there looking at the contract and I thought about Tyler's laugh as he threw my work in the trash. I thought about the splintered easel. I thought about the cold pot roast. And then I picked up the heavy, expensive pen Arthur offered me. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name with a flourish, the ink flowing smooth and black. Arthur shook my hand again and told me the wire transfer would hit my account within 48 hours. I left the gallery feeling 10 feet tall. The city air tasted sweeter. I wasn't Invisible Grandma anymore. I was Evelyn the artist and I had a secret worth millions. I took the train back to the suburbs, clutching my copy of the contract. When I walked back into the house, it was chaos as usual. The TV blaring, dishes piled in the sink, Tyler shouting at his video game. But this time the noise didn't grate on my nerves. It sounded like background noise in a movie I was about to walk out of. I walked past them to my room, a small, secret smile playing on my lips. They had no idea that the eyesore in the guest room had just become the most valuable asset in the state. The explosion didn't happen with a bang. It happened with the crinkling of high-quality bond paper. I had made a tactical error, one born of exhaustion and a fleeting sense of safety. After returning from the gallery, I had left the appraisal letter and the preliminary contract on my bedside table, tucked inside the leather portfolio but not locked away. In my mind, nobody ever went into my room. To them, my room was the zone of irrelevance, a place where old lady things happened that they wanted no part of. I underestimated the prying eyes of a daughter-in-law who was convinced I was hiding cash under my mattress. I walked into the kitchen the next morning around 8 a.m., expecting the usual routine, ignoring me until they needed a babysitter or a package signed for. Instead, the atmosphere was frozen. It was like walking into a photograph. Linda was standing by the kitchen island, but she wasn't making school lunches. She was holding Arthur Vance's letter. Her hands were trembling so violently that the paper was making a distinct rattling sound against the granite countertop. Mark was standing behind her, reading over her shoulder, his mouth hanging open slightly, looking like a fish that had just been pulled out of the water. I stopped in the doorway, tightening the belt of my robe. My first instinct was anger, the violation of my privacy, the audacity of her snooping through my private portfolio. But then I saw the look in Linda's eyes as she lifted her head to look at me. It wasn't the usual annoyance or condescension. It was a terrifying mixture of shock, greed, and sudden, desperate calculation. "Evelyn," she breathed out. She didn't call me Grandma or Mark's mom, like she usually did when she was irritated. She used my name and she said it with a reverence usually reserved for religious figures. Is this real? Arthur Vance. The Arthur Vance." I walked over and gently plucked the letter from her fingers. "I believe I left that in my private room, Linda," I said, keeping my voice cool and steady. "I didn't realize you were cleaning in there this morning." "I was just gathering towels," she stammered, her face flushing a deep blotchy red. "But Evelyn, the numbers. It says the collection is valued at $500,000? For the initial run." Mark finally found his voice. He let out a strangled laugh, the kind of sound a man makes when he realizes he's been sitting on a gold mine while complaining about the cost of dirt. "Mom," he said, stepping around the counter to pull out a chair for me. He had never pulled out a chair for me in 3 years. "Sit down. Do you want coffee? I'll make it fresh." None of that instant stuff. I sat down, watching this theater of the absurd unfold. Mark bustled around the kitchen making a fresh pot of coffee, while Linda hovered near me, touching my shoulder lightly, patting my arm like I was a fragile, precious artifact. It was sickening. Just 24 hours ago, this same woman had watched her son throw my work in the trash and told me to tie the bag tight. Now she was looking at me like I was the solution to every financial mistake they had ever made. "We always knew," Linda said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Didn't we, Mark? We always said Evelyn had a gift. I mean, sure, we joked around sometimes, you know how families are, but deep down, we were your biggest fans." I took a sip of the coffee Mark placed in front of me. It was bitter, but I forced a smile. "Is that so?" I asked. I seemed to remember Tyler calling it preschool trash just yesterday. Oh, he's just a boy. Mark waved his hand dismissively, sweating slightly. He doesn't understand high art like we do, Mom. He was just, teenager angst. If we knew that you were operating at this level, we would have built you a studio in the backyard years ago. In fact, I was just thinking about that. We could knock down the shed, put up a nice glass-walled studio with northern light. You need proper space to create. The gaslighting was happening in real time, and it was breathtaking in its audacity. They were rewriting history right in front of my face. The broken easel, the Sunday roast insults, the years of invisibility, they were trying to sweep it all under the rug with the broom of potential wealth. They weren't seeing me, they were seeing the commission check. They were seeing a new car, a renovation, a vacation to Cabo. Then Tyler walked in. He was rubbing sleep out of his eyes, wearing just his boxer shorts and a t-shirt. He headed straight for the fridge, grunting a hello to no one. "Tyler!" Linda practically shrieked. "Come hug your grandmother." Tyler froze, a carton of milk halfway to his mouth. He looked at Linda like she had grown a second head. "What?" "Your grandmother," Linda said, intense and wide-eyed, "is a genius. A famous artist. He's going to be very wealthy, Tyler. Show some respect." Tyler looked at me, then at the letter on the table, then back at his mother. The gears in his head turned slowly. He didn't apologize for the easel. He didn't say sorry for the trash bag. A slow, sly grin spread across his face. "For real? Does that mean I can get the VIP passes now? Since, we're rich." "We aren't rich, Tyler," I said softly. "I am." The room went silent for a beat, but they laughed it off. "Oh, Mom, you're such a joker," Mark said, slapping my back a little too hard. "What's yours is ours, right? Family sticks together. That's what I told you when you moved in. Family takes care of each other." I looked at the three of them, the sharks circling the water, smelling blood. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were already planning how to manage my career, how to siphon off the profits, how to keep me painting until my hands fell off so they could live the lifestyle they felt they deserved. They thought they had won the lottery. They thought I was a senile old woman who would just hand over the checkbook because they made me a fresh cup of coffee. "You're right, Mark," I said, standing up and smoothing down my robe. "Family should take care of each other. That is a very important lesson. One I have been thinking about a lot lately." I picked up the letter and walked out of the kitchen. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with greed and anticipation. They thought my agreement meant they were safe. They had no clue that I had one more meeting with Arthur Vance that afternoon, and the instructions I was about to give him had nothing to do with building a backyard studio or buying Tyler VIP passes. The fake smiles were bright, but my plan was brighter. The sale went through 2 weeks later. It was a whirlwind of wire transfers, legal documents, and a final exhibition night that was the talk of the city. I didn't invite my family to the opening. I told them tickets were limited and strictly for buyers, which was a lie, but I didn't want their greedy energy tainting my moment. When the final tally came in, the number was even higher than the initial appraisal. It was a life-changing sum. It was quit your job and live on a yacht money. When I came home that Friday evening, the house smelled of expensive steak. Mark and Linda had clearly decided to pre-spend some of the fortune. They had set the dining table with the good china, the stuff they usually kept locked away in the cabinet, and there was a bottle of chilled champagne sitting in a silver bucket. Even Tyler was there, wearing a shirt with a collar for once, looking uncharacteristically polite. He actually pulled my chair out for me. The transformation was complete. They were the perfect, loving family, performing for an audience of one, hoping for a standing ovation in the form of a bank transfer. "To Mom." Mark toasted, raising his glass high. His eyes were glittering. "To her hidden talent and to the bright future of this family." "To Grandma," Tyler echoed, grinning. "And to the new gaming rig I'm gonna build." I took a sip of my water. I didn't touch the champagne. I watched them eat, watched them slice into the filet mignon they had undoubtedly charged to a credit card they expected me to pay off. The conversation was dominated by their plans. Linda talked about a kitchen renovation with marble countertops. Mark talked about a new SUV. Tyler talked about his VIP festival tickets and a trip to Japan. They didn't ask me a single question about the art or the buyers, or how it felt to finally be recognized. They just talked about the harvest they hadn't sown. I waited until dessert was served, a rich chocolate tart that Linda had bought from a bakery. I cleared my throat and reached into my purse. The table went instantly silent. You could hear a pin drop. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto my hand as I pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. I know you have all been very anxious about the sale, I said, my voice steady and calm. And I wanted to share the news with you tonight. Mark leaned forward, practically vibrating. Is that the check? It is the receipt of the transfer, I corrected. I slid the paper across the table. Mark snatched it up. Linda leaned over his shoulder. Tyler stood up to get a better look. I saw their eyes widen as they saw the total amount at the bottom. It was in the millions. Linda actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. We're rich. Mark, we're actually rich. There is a second page, I said softly. Mark flipped the page. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. It was like watching a curtain fall. His jaw went slack and his eyes bulged. Linda, reading over his shoulder, let out a sound that was half scream, half choke. What is this? Mark whispered, his voice trembling with rage. What does this mean? It means, I said, taking a bite of the chocolate tart, that the Evelyn Miller Art Scholarship for Underprivileged Youth is now fully funded. You donated it? Linda shrieked. The sweetness was gone. The mask had shattered completely. You donated our money? Money, I corrected, sharpening my tone. And yes, all of it. Well, almost all of it. I kept enough to buy a small, quiet condo on the other side of town. I move out on Monday. But the rest? The millions? It's gone. It's going to buy easels for kids who can't afford them. It's going to buy paints for teenagers whose parents think art is a waste of time. It's going to ensure that no other young artist has to watch their work get thrown in a garbage bag because their family thinks it's useless trash. Tyler looked like he was about to cry. But my gaming setup? The VIP tickets. Maybe you can get a job, I suggested pleasantly. I hear the grocery store is hiring baggers. It's honest work. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Mark stared at the paper, his hands shaking. He looked up at me, betrayal written all over his face. The betrayal of a parasite realizing the host has cut it off. How could you do this to us? To your family? I did exactly what you taught me, I said, standing up. You taught me that my art was worthless. You taught me that I was a burden. You taught me that my only value to you was monetary. So I removed the money from the equation. Now we can just be family, right? Just love and connection without the cash. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of the dining room, leaving them sitting there with their expensive steak and their massive credit card debt. I went to my room and packed the last of my things. As I zipped up my suitcase, I looked at the empty spot where my easel used to be. I felt lighter than air. I had lost a family that never truly saw me, but I had found myself. And somewhere out there, a kid was going to get a brand new easel because of me, and that was worth more than all the marble countertops in the world. That is my story, everyone. It's been a wild ride from the trash can to the gallery, and I hope it reminds you that your passion is never useless, no matter what anyone says. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a beat. And drop a comment below. Would you have donated the money or would you have kept it all for yourself? I'll be reading your replies. Thanks for watching and keep creating.